Welcome to the EcoParent Podcast Network. I'm Sam, the founder of EcoParent Magazine. If you listened to any of the first 5 episodes of this show, then you're familiar with the tumultuous history of EcoParent's early years. Don't worry, I won't subject you to that again. Instead, I just want to remind you of why we do this. It's for you. EcoParent has always been for you. The parents who go the extra mile to do a little better for their kids, their families, and for the planet. But the relationship is symbiotic. EcoParent also needs you. So if you like these podcasts and find that they add value to your life, if they inspire you or make you feel more connected, please share them with your friends. Reviews are also a great way to tell the listening platform that the podcast is worth recommending. So, if you're not busy driving a kid here or there, or making supper, or any of the other awesome parent stuff that you do, please take the time to pause this recording and give it a quick review, or text it to a friend.
Dad, can we record the outro?
Sure.
Diversity doesn't mean that you're trying to stuff 50 million different foods into you in a given week. If we look at our ancestors, the diversity came over the seasons. So they might eat a lot of these foods in the spring and a lot of these foods in the summer, and it rotated. So diversity is key.
The Feeding Families podcast is all about nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions so you can overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families. Hello, families. Welcome back to the Feeding Families podcast. I feel like I start every episode by saying I have an amazing guest to share with you today. And because I do, this gives me the opportunity to talk to such amazing people. So I'm going to say it again. We have an amazing person here to talk with, and you are going to love this because we are tackling a topic I get asked a lot over and over and over again about, which is the microbiome. How do we feed the microbiome? Why should we care about the microbiome? What is the microbiome? We could call it gut bugs. We could call it digestive health. We could call it gut health. We could call it microbiota, all kinds of fancy terms. It has taken the world of nutrition by storm in the last 20 years or so, maybe even longer than that. And I have Lorene Sauro here to talk about all things gut microbiome. Thanks for coming, Lorene.
I'm very pleased to be here, and it's my pleasure to chat with you always, Jess.
Likewise. So, Lorene, I'm going to read your bio, and then we're going to dive into this juicy topic of gut health. Lorene Sauro has been a holistic nutrition professional for 22 years and a food professional for 30 years. She's a food developer, acclaimed speaker, published author. Frustrated by the lack of common sense when it comes to the discussion of food and health, Lorene works to help the public find the food and health solutions that are right for them, and also provides support to professionals to help them have more answers for their clients. She founded the Functional Microbiome Program, the Functional Hormone Balance Program, and the Inspired Learning Hub, which is a webinar series for practitioners that provides them with research about food and the wellness industry. She is the co-founder of the Canadian Holistic Nutrition Conference and the Canadian Association of Holistic Nutrition Professionals. And she has helped hundreds of holistic nutrition students and graduates with their educational and professional needs. For all of this, in 2017, Lorene received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition Alumni Association for all of her work in the industry. So, you have been at this for a long time, and I know what I appreciate about you so much, Lorene, is that you have this incessant, compulsion, drive to stay on top of the research and to really base nutritional recommendations in facts, in evolving scientific research, and just translating it all into really practical strategies. And when it comes to the microbiome, my gosh, things have been evolving daily, it seems. There's always new research, and parents are often, when they're trying to feed their kids, they often dive into the research and swim in this mess of information and come out, kind of lift their head up thinking, okay, so what do I do? Like, okay, this is important. What do I do? So I want to start with something that you said, which is this. We're missing a great opportunity to think logically and make it easier for people to do what's right for them. So I want to start there and ask you what you mean by that.
Well, that statement is born from the plethora of different types of diets or food recommendations that are constantly being put on to the public with various theories that aren't really proven to just confuse people, right? And the biggest one is that certain foods are problematic. And when I say foods, I mean whole foods, things that nature created. I don't mean, some really chemicalized, refined, whatever. I don't mean those foods. That's not really food in my opinion. But anyway, so you've got all these theories about telling people don't eat this, don't eat that. And you look at what foods they are. And this ties into the microbiome because most of the foods they're talking about actually feed beneficial bacteria, but that's a whole other topic. And if they were thinking logically, if they had thought logically, whether it's the person's listening to the theory or the person's creating the theory, and say, well, you know what, this food, the majority of the people in the world have no problem with this food. So that means it's not the food, it's the person. And what we're coming into in this age right now is the age of individualization and the concept that no one diet is right for everyone, right? And these diets have been around for generations. Like, this is nothing new. But because of this, nobody looked inward. This is why we missed so much microbiome information for so many years, is because nobody looked inward and said, well, why would this person have this allergy? Or why would this person not be able to digest this food? And we can even extend that to, why does this person have this illness and not this person, right? So that is where that comes from, is the idea that it's illogical that it's the food. It's illogical. It's not the food. And we're going to get into this, obviously, it's the gut.
Yeah.
So what's going on? What's going on down there?
Yeah.
What happened?
It's such a valuable point because as parents, we just need to feed our kids. Like, we just need to get the foods into them. And then we get all of these conflicting information about, like, oh, kids should be on a high fat diet, or there's food sensitivities. You got to take out 75 foods, or milk is bad, or gluten is bad, or go keto, or go paleo. And we get all of this from all these different directions. And we're left in the middle going, I just got to feed my kid. And I just want to do right by them. Right. And this reframe that you've just given us is so important. I want to re-articulate it because it's so important. It's that we live in harmony with the natural world. All the foods that are offered to us by the world, by the earth, are meant to be in the body. But if the body is not receiving them well, there's an issue. And the issue is not with the food. The issue is with the body.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the microbiome, because that is where the food gets received by the body, is in the digestive tract. So first of all, can you define the microbiome for people?
Well, first of all, the term microbiome applies to many different areas. So what most people are, when they say they want to learn more about the microbiome, it's the gut microbiome that they're particularly interested in. To say the gut microbiome, especially if we're talking about food, is a bit of a misnomer, because actually your ability to digest foods, or utilize foods is probably a better term, starts right in the mouth and it goes all the way through. And typically the gut is the colon, but we tend to have expanded it to also include the small intestines. And I'm saying, well, just keep going and include the mouth while you're at it, and the throat and the stomach and the whole, just the GI tract, just include the whole darn thing.
We could even include the brain, right? Like our cephalic, like our sense of smell and how we think about food also, right? As part of the digestive system.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because this is what I've been researching lately, is Why? And again, the sense of smell in particular and the sense of taste go right up into the brain. And so there's a lot of signaling going on there and a lot of connections there, and it's tied into our emotions. But if we want to keep it simple with regard to food, then for the most part, other than the smell and the taste, we're talking about what happens as it comes into the mouth and goes downward, right? And so the microbiome itself, the word microbiome just means a group of microorganisms. That's all it is in the atmosphere that they inhabit. And there are tons of microbiomes around us and in us. So we don't just have a gut microbiome. We have a mouth microbiome, ear, eye, nose, skin, lungs, reproductive system. They're finding breast has its own microbiome. Like everything has its own microbiome almost, that they haven't really connected all the dots, but it's going that way. Generally speaking, when you react to a food, it's going to start somewhere in the mouth and somewhere down below. The reaction is going to occur. So sometimes it occurs in the mouth, sometimes it doesn't, right? It waits. And that all has to do with the community of microbes that exist within the person, what's going to happen. So specific microbes help you digest specific foods. If you don't have the specific microbes that help you digest the food, you either don't utilize it, which is your best case scenario, and you just excrete whatever, or you react. And this is where allergies come into the picture. And again, the allergy picture is a little more complicated than I just said, but it starts with this basic theory that if you don't have the right microbes, you may react to a food. And then once you react to the food, well, that's when things become unpleasant for the person, depending on what the reaction is. So that's basically what we're talking about, is what is this environment that the person has?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that. And I think, some of not to get too complicated, but our microbes aren't only acting on our food, right? Like the impact of the microbiome extends much further than just our digestibility of food. That is important. And there's a lot of trickle down effect. If you can't digest your food, then, you can't create the building blocks for other things in the body. But can you just sort of talk about some of the research on the impact of the microbiome on the various parts of the body?
Okay, so these little microbes that you have trillions of are making all kinds of decisions for the physical body. So even when you eat your food, your food is going to feed the microbes. The microbes, in turn, depending on what the microbes do, are going to send signals into the body. And so when they are beneficial microbes, obviously they're sending good messages into the body to help maintain tissue, make the body function properly, like everything you can think of that you might want. This is what the beneficial microbes can contribute to, assuming you have the right amount and the right diversity, because that's a whole other subject in itself. But if they're more pathogenic strains, or what we call the bad microbes, they will be signaling dysfunction. And that can be anything from brain function, when you start looking at diseases like Alzheimer's, anything like that, allergies and autoimmunity, heart disease, diabetes, these have all been connected to an imbalance in the beneficial bacteria to the bad bacteria. And that sounds simplistic. It isn't simplistic at all, because what they're doing now with the research is linking specific pathogenic strains to specific health conditions. So they see more prevalence of certain strains in somebody who has multiple sclerosis, and then they see a different type of pathogenic set of microbes in those who have diabetes or allergies or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it makes it really complicated, because you don't know what you have, and there really isn't a good way to tell you what you have. The testing so far is not that specific. You can get the families, but you can't get the specific unless they took all your strains, which would be impossible, and researched each and every one of them, which is never going to happen. There's trillions of them.
Well, which is what they're trying to do. I mean, this is what science does, right? It's like they try to isolate, break it all down and say, okay, you need this microbe for this thing and this microbe for this thing. And what I'm more compelled by is the research around it being an ecosystem, and it really being that a self-managing ecosystem that knows what to do. It's highly intelligent. Like these little microbes are I don't know if smart is the right word, but they have an intelligence to them. They keep each other in check and they keep each other in balance if they're provided the right resources. Would you agree?
That's correct. I absolutely. And there's a communication system amongst them, as well as one with the body. And, it is normal for us to have, say, the bad microbes in us. That's not a problem as long as they're kept at bay. And it's like the majority rules. So if they are kept in check, in some cases, they actually help us when they're playing nicely with the good guys.
When they're playing nicely, exactly. And so that's why I've started to catch myself when I say bad bacteria, and I shift that over to opportunistic, right? It's like these are the potentially bad bacteria, but they're not bad. It's like there's no bad child, but they have the potential to cause chaos
Exactly.
when given the right environment. And if there's enough structures in place to help them feel like they don't need to cause trouble, then they're a valued member of the community.
Yeah, the child analogy is great. Like, think of a room full of children and there's no structure in the room. If you think of the more opportunistic strains, as you call them, as the children, and there's no coordination of their activities, then what are they going to do? Whatever comes to mind.
Yeah.
So this is what they do. It's like, I can reproduce now. What will I do when I reproduce? Uncontrolled.
Right, exactly. And I extend that to be like, okay, so the fix here isn't to kill them. Right? The fix is to rearrange the ecosystem so that they don't have so much control, right? I mean, that's how I look at it. Is that really where the research is going that you see?
Well, first of all, it's difficult because when you're looking at research, you have to understand what the researcher's purpose is. Usually research is done towards some form of creation of something, right?
Right.
A lot of times it's for a creation of a drug, or sometimes it's for a creation of a health product or whatever. And so, first of all, there is a lot of research on natural substances, and I don't use the word kill, I use the word inhibit, because it's exactly what you said, Jess, that, we don't want to kill them all. We can't anyway. We're just going to pick up some more somewhere else along the way, because a lot of times we ingest some of them through our hands, to our mouth, to whatever. So it's a futile effort. What a lot of the research is showing, like, for example, one of the things I remember hearing people say is that, oil of oregano kills your good bacteria because it kills bad bacteria. Well, it doesn't kill bad bacteria. It inhibits bacteria. And what it also does is promote good bacteria. So now that's where the research is going. They've got a number of essential oils out there that, and again, the same substances are in the food too, but just not at such a concentrated level. But they're finding like, they're promoting these beneficial bacteria and this beneficial bacteria while they're inhibiting those guys over there. And that is something that is really a concept we don't understand. It's either black or white. It either does good, it either kills or it grows, because that's what we have. Pesticides kill, soil grows. Like, these are concepts that we're used to. And this sort of adaptability within nature to our benefit isn't really understood very well. But the good news is they're getting more and more of the pieces, and the research is going in that direction.
That's so interesting how, like, again, we try to reduce things in studies and in research, and it comes back to the same foundational concepts that you would find in any traditional society, which is that we live in concert with the natural world, and our internal ecosystem is supported by our external ecosystem, and everything is connected. And now what we're finding, like you say, something like oregano, a natural product, and we see this with some mushrooms, and we see this with a lot of herbs and things. It does exactly what our bodies need it to do, which is support the good stuff and inhibit the bad stuff. And we just need to trust the natural wisdom.
Exactly. And so I wonder, when I read research like that, did oil of oregano, I know it can kill in a petri dish, but we're not a petri dish. So I'm wondering, is when you ingest it, if it ever could kill, and all it ever did was increase the beneficial bacteria, which in turn inhibited the bad bacteria, because that's what the good bacteria can do. It can keep those guys at bay and they can't proliferate. They're not on an equal playing field. So again, these are all questions that they're going to have, and these got to be answered. The good news is it doesn't change what we can do.
Right, which is so interesting too, right? It's like the research is like, again, it's all coming back to the common sense you were talking about at the beginning, is we feed our body the good food that it needs, it knows how to self-regulate. So let's talk about some of those practical pieces around when we say, oh, you've got to feed your microbiome. What does that entail?
So there are a lot of different foods that can feed good bacteria. As I mentioned earlier, they feed different strains. So what you want is a diverse diet. And again, there's more research to be done. Diversity doesn't mean that you're trying to stuff 50 million different foods into you in a given week. If we look at our ancestors, the diversity came over the seasons. So they might eat a lot of these foods in the spring and a lot of these foods in the summer, and it rotated. So diversity is key. But the foods that feed are pretty straightforward. You've got grains, so anything with fiber, grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables. You've got dairy products, right? Dairy products have 2 really great prebiotics in them. And it doesn't matter what animal that came from. So it could be goat or cow or whatever. But you've got everything that you need if you're eating a relatively balanced diet and trying to get as many fruits and vegetables into you. You're adding a lot of what we call prebiotics into the diet to feed the microbes and the beneficial ones. If you feed the beneficial microbes, you're going to have the best foundation for having health and maintaining health.
Before we move on, can you just define prebiotic? Because people hear that a lot. What is a prebiotic?
Prebiotic feeds bacteria. A probiotic is bacteria. And by the way, a fermented food has both pre and probiotics in it. Because the way the probiotics got there is because they ate the prebiotics, but they didn't eat all of them, so they're still there.
Yeah, I got to just mention, we got to come back to the dairy thing because a lot of parents have questions about dairy. So we'll come back to that, but let's keep going around how to feed a microbiome.
So basically what you want to do is figure out the foods that, again, if you're dealing with a person who has some issues, they're going to have to figure out what foods they can or cannot do. At no point is it a list of 75 foods they have to remove. It might be 1 or 2. In some cases, it could be more severe, but that's a whole other conversation. But on average, it's not that many if you have to remove any. But, and this is the part that gets lost in the conversation, that food, if you've done a good job helping to restore the function of the microbiome, that food should be able to go back in at some point. You can't say 100% that it will, but it makes an amazing test. So if you have a food sensitivity and you remove it and you work on your microbiome and then you try that food, if you notice less symptoms, you know you're making progress. And I've worked with enough people to know that does occur. It doesn't happen 100%, but it does occur. Yes.
Yeah. And that's so important because often people will do a food sensitivity test. They see their child is highly reactive to all kinds of food. They take all those foods out. The child feels better. And then there's no reintroduction strategy. They're just on this limited diet for years and years and years. And I've seen this many, many times because they're like, my child feels better when they don't eat all this stuff. But what you're saying is that there's a missing step there because the body should be able to accept those foods. So if it's not, if it's having a reaction to them, there's work to do on the microbiome. So you got to do that work. Then you should be able to reintroduce some of these foods. I see that pattern as well, too.
And when you say sensitivity testing, are you talking about IgG testing in particular?
Yeah. We did another episode on the different kinds of tests you can do for food sensitivities. But yeah, IgA, IgM, IgG, the various types of food sensitivities.
Okay, so this is an important piece of information too. An IgG sensitivity test cannot tell you what you'll react to. It can only guess at what you might react to because there's other players that determine reactivity, like your Treg cells, right? Your immune tolerance. And so it can only be used as a guide. So you get this list where, the person has got all these sensitivities, but they may not be sensitivities to them. And maybe 1 food on that list, maybe 2 foods. Like you just don't know. And there's only one way to find out. right? Clean up the situation. You have to remove them in the short term, and then one at a time, you stick them back in and see if any of them are really something you're sensitive to. I know that sounds like a pain in the butt. It is.
It is tedious, but I agree with you. I think these tests can be a really good screening tool to give you a sense of how much inflammation and irritation is in the gut or is in the body. But it really just gives you a guide as to where to look for these sources of inflammation, which may or may not be sources of inflammation. But sometimes you take them out and you're just like, whoa, wow, my kid feels so much better. And then sometimes you take them out and you see nothing. And it doesn't mean the test is invalid. It just means that we don't use them as diagnostic tests. We use them as a guide to strategically play around with foods. But the bottom line comes back to what you said before, which is the microbiome. If you have a lot of reactivity in the gut, it means your body is not receiving this food very well. And chances are that's because the signaling is off, like you explained.
Exactly. And so you want to correct the signaling. And once you do that, then the symptoms can disappear. And by the way, non-reactivity means the immune system's functioning well too. So it has broader implications just beyond digesting a food. It's not uncommon with a lot of these children that have the food sensitivities. They also get a lot of colds and flus. And you know what I mean? Like, I know kids should get colds and flus to build their immunity, but there's a point at which is a little too much too often in comparison to other children. So this can be one of the factors as well. And it all can go back to fixing the microbiome.
Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is being brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. Do you want to improve your health and well-being, but you're not sure how? Have you an interest in food and nutrition and the science behind it? Kickstart your health journey by learning the fundamentals of holistic nutrition through CSNN's Introduction to Natural Nutrition Certificate. This introductory certificate provides a great understanding of the links between health and nutrition. Successful completion can be transferred to the full natural nutrition program so you can earn your professional designation, title, and diploma. It's available at select CSNN branches. You can learn more at csnn.ca/holistic-family, or you can follow the links in the show notes. Can we talk a little bit about how a microbiome becomes disjointed, dysregulated? I don't know what the word is that we want to use, but out of balance. We call it dysbiosis, but just how does it become out of balance? And in this discussion, I want to talk a little bit about where the research is at in terms of the impact of the microbiome early in life on health later in life.
Okay, well, if we want to start in the early days, right? So there's a lot of things they still don't know, like does the population of their microbiomes, because there's more than one in the body, start in the womb. And so there's some research that says, yes, it does. And there's some that says they're not sure. But we do know for sure that once they are being born, when they come down the chute, they get some. They get some from the breast milk. If they're delivered cesarean, they're going to get some from the skin. So basically what you have is these components that we are exposed to when we're first born. And the quality of the strains is going to be dependent on the mother. So if her microbiome is good, and her breast microbiome is good, she's going to be delivering the most, even her skin microbiome. So say she had to have cesarean for whatever reasons, there's still a really good research that shows that it's not that problematic. Once the baby is born, now they're going to start building more of their own. And so the prebiotics that they need are in the breast milk. So they start getting breast milk prebiotics, and this grows their own bacteria. But again, even studies have shown that a bottle-fed baby can catch up, and especially now when they're adding prebiotics into the breast formula. So there's no black and white here. There's lots of opportunity. So once you have this relatively diverse microbiome, this is what you need to carry you through life. And the way that is done is maintaining it by giving it the microbes, the foods they want.
Two things I want to highlight there is that, first of all, no more mom guilt. If you had a cesarean and you bottle fed and all of the things, you didn't wreck your kid. Like we do this to ourselves as parents, right? We're just like, oh, if only someone had told me. No, there's still lots you can do for the microbiome. It does kind of set something in motion, but not the end of the world. The other piece that I think it highlights is that The idea of genetics, right? It's like, oh, well, I had psoriasis, so my child has psoriasis, or I had ADHD, so my child has ADHD, and thinking that that's purely genetic. And what we're seeing now is that, yes, there might be a genetic component, but inheriting your parents' microbiome or, the consortium of microbes also plays a huge role into what could be misinterpreted as solely genetic, but it's actually just because you have the same microbiota as your parents, which is shiftable. So it gives us a whole new opportunity to open up that conversation about inherited illnesses and inherited conditions.
And one of the things about research is showing that microbes play a role in how genes express themselves, a huge role. And if you think men are off the hook here, there's beneficial bacteria in sperm. So, because they talk about how if one parent has allergies, okay. So there's a contribution to what the baby is and the environment that the baby is grown in inside the mother that comes from the father too. It's not as much as what the mother is contributing, but it's still a contribution. So it's important that both parents have good microbiomes. And when the baby is born, again, we never talk about this. People are touching babies all the time. So are you touching them with a healthy microbiome on your skin, or are you touching them with an unhealthy microbiome on your skin, right? Like it's so interconnected. It's really quite fascinating if you don't think how complicated it is, which is a lot.
It makes me think about my first baby was a cesarean. And I didn't really know much. I knew a little bit of this at the time, but he was cesarean. I was able to see the baby all wrapped up. The baby, Benny is his name. I was able to see him all wrapped up, and I give him a kiss and stuff. And then he was given to dad while my medication wore off. And the doctors told me I wasn't allowed to leave the recovery room until I could feel my toes again, because I had, whatever medication they gave me to do the cesarean, right? So Benny went off with his dad and sucked on his finger for about half an hour because he was hungry. And then I was finally able to see him, put him on my body and feed him the prebiotics from the breast milk. And I think about that now, and I was like, wow, he must have gotten a lot of his dad's microbiome from just sucking on his finger for that time. Do you think?
Yes, because even though each microbiome in the body, even within your skin, there's like 40 different types of combinations of microbes all over the skin. Every area has a different combination. But even with that, there are overlap strains that are found in the skin or in the mouth or in the lungs with those in the gut. Like there's some that are common all over the place, and there's some that are unique to the specific area of the body. And this is why it's complicated, but this just means that everything can contribute in a positive way. Or if the microbiomes are off, it can contribute in a negative way. So that's what we need to understand. I mean, this goes beyond food, right? If we're starting to talk about the skin, we're going, what are the cleaning products? What kind of things do you put on your skin? Like, do they inhibit microbes? Like, there's so much more you can talk about with that in part of having a more natural lifestyle. So it all ties together. This is what I'm saying. The solutions are pretty simple in terms of the concept, right? You want to get as many chemicals out of the environment, and you want to have as many chemicals out of the food and more prebiotics in everything. And you want to feed these microbes and help them thrive. And so you were asking about what influences it. So the biggest factor is food. And so the less diverse the diet and the poorer the quality of the food, the less nutrients. So I mentioned fiber as being prebiotic, but there's also other chemicals in the food that are prebiotic. For example, the polyphenols that I don't know if you've ever talked about those, but those are the things, the phytonutrients that are found in any purple, blue, red, black foods. And they have a lot of numerous health benefits that research has shown, but they're also prebiotic. So we don't know, and again, I may be going too far with this, we don't know is if the reason they're beneficial for the body is because they're actually beneficial for the body, or is it because they feed the microbes and then the microbes do the benefit for the body. That's another thing where they're looking at right now. It's like, is it really the food doing it, or is it the microbes doing it because they got the right meal with the right signals?
That's amazing. Again, these highly intelligent little critters that are living in us, like running the show. And from a practical perspective, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we get lots of bright colors and diversity into our kids. So that's the take home here, right?
And I know that's a lot to say when feeding kids. They're not known for their joy of diverse foods. They're known for liking certain things that they like, right?
Right. But this conversation, I think, highlights that it's well worth your time and your energy to continue to offer quality, best you can afford, lots of diversity, try new things. Crispy is good, color is good, fresh is good. And, we've talked about picky eating on the show in multiple times. It is just worth your time and your energy because every little bit you get into them is improving the microbiome, which is then improving the signaling, right? And we need to do things that are going to give us big bang for our buck. And this is one of things, our energy buck, right? Oh, and our money, but this is one of those things.
One of the things that I am interested in finding out is when you have somebody who's a picky eater, and it doesn't matter if we're talking a child or an adult, is it because the microbes in their microbiome are driving the pickiness? So you're feeding those strains that want that food, because even though a refined food isn't very good for the microbiome's beneficial bacteria, doesn't mean it doesn't support life in the microbiome. And it could be supporting certain not so beneficial bacteria. And are those signaling the person's brain to crave and desire those foods? That's what I'm waiting to see research on right now. I highly suspect it is, but again, we don't know for sure.
Which reminds me that I wanted to come back to dairy, because a lot of parents have kids who love their dairy. We know it can be addictive in some ways, but we also know it might have, and you alluded to this, it might have health benefits. So let's be a little controversial here and dig into the risk-benefit analysis of dairy.
Okay, so first of all, when I recommend dairy, I'm talking about organic dairy, or preferably grass-fed, because this is where you're going to get the highest nutrient content for the dairy. So what we lose when animals are not raised organically and they're not grass-fed is when we talked about phytonutrients earlier, they're finding phytonutrients in dairy and in meat, I might also add, from animals that are grass-fed, especially if they're getting a diverse diet. So it's ending up available to us through this route. But anyway, so there's two really important prebiotics. One is lactose. So it feeds a lot of lactobacillus strains, which are a beneficial type. And the other is GOS, lacto-oligosaccharides, but we just say GOS because that's too big a word. And GOS is one of the number one prebiotics a baby needs to receive when they're developing the bacteria in their colon, their bifidus bacteria in particular. And this is how they get immune tolerance, and they build up Treg cells, and they build up brain cells, and it lowers anxiety and there's so many benefits to GOS. Obviously, mother's milk has GOS in it.
Go figure.
All animal milk has GOS in it, right? We're all mammals, all got GOS in it, okay? But GOS, it helps you absorb nutrients. It's just an amazing substance. And so when people are being steered away from dairy for no reason, they're losing out on a food that A, a child will generally likes, right? Most children like it. And B, that is really good for their microbiome. The problems we have to watch out for is you don't want to have them consuming nothing but dairy. They're not going to have enough diversity. And two, do they have a sensitivity or an allergy to it, which is a microbiome problem, but you've got to fix that first before they could have the dairy. Again, there's nothing about dairy that is problematic for the majority of people in the world. So therefore, if it's problematic for a child, the question is why? And I would also like to throw in, because we were talking about, what helps or hurts the microbiome. Antibiotics is the number one damaging factor to your beneficial microbes. Even though an antibiotic kills both good and bad, for whatever reasons, the bad seem to be able to recover faster than the good. And now you've got this imbalance. And when we see a lot of children with food sensitivities or allergies, antibiotics entered into the picture somewhere at some point. So it could have been given to the mother, it could have been given to the baby. And then now, of course, they have this, not all hospitals do this, but a lot of them are giving antibiotics to the mother and the baby upon delivery, even when it's not cesarean, when it's regular delivery. There was a study being done in Alberta to see the risk of allergy development as a result of this antibiotic use during delivery. And they were finding a higher statistic of allergies developing in these children. And most of it was being done as a preventative as opposed to there was an infection to fight. So with antibiotics, we want to make sure there's an infection to fight. It's not used as a preventative. And then second of all, protect the microbiome from the antibiotic by taking probiotics. So we always have something we can do. If we know what to do, there's always something to do.
They're putting some of that GOS in some probiotics for formula-fed babies who can't get the benefit from breast milk. So that's important to look for. That's fairly new on the market, I think.
It is.
But it is now quite available. Again, want to highlight, I'm a big word person, as are you, I think. It's really important that we are specific. So using the right words when we're talking about foods. And when people say, oh, dairy is inflammatory, or dairy is bad, or dairy causes this or causes that, exactly. I throw up my hands too, because it's not the dairy. It's potentially what we've done to the dairy. It's potentially what is in the dairy that is not dairy.
That inflammatory one is the one that drives me the most crazy.
Oh, dig in.
Again,
pull it apart.
There are 52 studies. I have a meta-analysis study of 52 dairy studies looking specifically to see if it's inflammatory. There is absolutely no relationship. And again, some of these studies are giving it to a person and measuring their inflammatory markers to see if they go up, right? A before and after. Very, very specific. Like nothing has been studied more, I swear. And what they found was that not only is it not inflammatory unless you have an allergy, which of course is an inflammatory reaction, and not only is it not inflammatory for some conditions like found in the metabolic syndrome family, like high blood pressure, diabetes, all that stuff, it's actually anti-inflammatory. And so this is part of the problem of the world that we live in. They couldn't pick a better example that a lot of the information we have was made on assumptions, not research or facts. It's like, this person had a sensitivity and took out the dairy and they felt better. Oh, it must be inflammatory. I'm serious. That's how it got started and that's how it spread. And then it just spreads and spreads and spreads without any kind of foundation. Again, if you have some problem with the food, there's going to be an inflammatory reaction. But it's you that's having the inflammatory reaction. It's not the dairy. The dairy's not doing anything. It's just dairy. And scientifically, when you look at a wide group of people, there's no evidence of it being inflammatory. I want to kill that one. That's one I want to kill. I want to put that one to bed forever.
I so appreciate that. I appreciate that about you, Lorene, that you're very, very straight up. But let me put myself out there and ask you a question, because the way I think about dairy is this. Conventionally raised, pasteurized dairy is difficult to digest. Because it's difficult to digest in that form, it has a high potential for causing inflammation in the body. Doesn't mean it necessarily will, but it has a high potential. If we were talking about pasture-raised cows, organic dairy that had not been pasteurized and has all of the microbiome from the cow and all of that microbiota, it would be a different story. And if we were talking about dairy that had been fermented and infused with all of the probiotic bacteria, it would be a different story. But off the supermarket shelf dairy has high potential to cause inflammation, but it doesn't necessarily cause inflammation. Would you say that's accurate? Feel free to pull me apart.
Okay. So all those studies I just mentioned were done with pasteurized conventional dairy. So I would like to say the inflammation thing is not an issue. Would I advocate for exactly what you said about unpasteurized In a perfect world, we could all have unpasteurized dairy readily available to us. It's in other parts of the world, this is the case, but of course we have all our rules and regulations, and it's considered the big evil, and it's not. I mean, I can get unpasteurized dairy. I have the secret handshake and the signal that, allows me to get my dairy if I want it. I don't bother because I don't have an issue with dairy, so I just buy my organic dairy. We can get raw milk cheeses, which is good. There's unpasteurized dairy right there from some cheese companies. Got to be careful when I say that. But the nutrient content, so I would phrase it a little differently. If you don't maximize the food, the nutrient content of the food the way nature could maximize it, and you're constantly giving an inferior version of what nature would have you have, then you're doing this not just with dairy. Don't pick on dairy, because we can go through the whole food system, including the fruits and vegetables and all the grains and everything that we consume, without even getting to the refined stuff or the chemicalized stuff. Just how we grow our food. We don't get as many nutrients and phytonutrients as we used to. The soils are not, we can go on and on. But if the quality of the dairy is not ideal, then you're not getting the benefits that you could get from the dairy. And if you're not getting that, especially if they're feeding your microbiome, you could be setting yourself up to develop other problems depending on what else you're eating and what else has happened to you. I would put it that way. Pasteurization isn't the worst. It's just not the best.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
But pasteurized organic dairy is better than a conventional pasteurized milk.
It all is built on a foundation of how healthy and resilient your body is as an individual. What happened leading up to this, and what's the state of your microbiome? How are you going to be receiving all foods?
Yes, and remember that your microbiome adapts. It adapts to you. What you do, it adapts. Everything you do, every stress you're under, every food you eat, every breath you take, they adapt. This is why we all have unique microbiomes. No two microbiomes are the same. Mm-hmm. So, how your microbiome adapts to whatever you feed it is going to be different from someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very variable.
Yeah, it's extremely variable. And every time you blink twice, if you don't get a sleep one night, your microbiome changes. Mm-hmm. Like, it's that adaptable to whatever. And just for the record, in case people are having trouble sleeping, pathogenic strains grow more during the time we're awake, and the beneficial ones grow more when we're asleep.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Another wonderful reason to focus on sleep. It's one of the core things that I do with my clients. Like, you've got it. Sleep is such a time when we regulate. I didn't know we also regulate our microbiome.
Could you imagine a world, thinking of mothers when they've given birth, if they could spend as much time as they needed sleeping, mm-hmm. what that might mean for the quality of not only their microbiome, but in turn the breast milk as well? And what do? We put mothers in this position where half the time they're running ragged, trying to cope with everyday life, plus the baby, plus, right?
It makes me wonder, some kids who are quote unquote, like terrible sleepers, right? The colicky babies, the kids who just won't settle down. I wonder what's going on. I just wonder about the microbiome connection, not only at the time, but also what's developing, right? Oh gosh, that's a whole nother area of things to think about.
Well, I think what we're going to see in the future is, instead of looking at symptoms of the body, we're looking at symptoms. We're calling them symptoms of the microbiome. Mm. So like the colic is a symptom of the stomach has a microbiome too, by the way, despite what people think about stomach acid. There's some strains that live there quite nicely. So maybe its colic doesn't really exist unless the microbiome determines that it exists. And that's all based on what strains are there.
The master puppeteers, it's like Oz behind the curtain. It's like the master regulator here in the microbiome. It's fascinating stuff. I think research continues to unravel. Another study comes across my desk almost daily of I didn't know that phytonutrients were prebiotics. I've learned so much just in this hour, Lorene. Thank you.
Has it been an hour? I guess it's been an hour.
Oh, we could talk about this for ages. I expect that some of the parents are throwing up their hands going, oh my gosh, I just can't get the diversity that we need into my child. And there are others who are fascinated and chopping up the veggies right now so that they could feed their kids' microbiome. So what would you want to leave parents with? What do you wish that all parents knew about their children's microbiome?
I would like them to not guilt themselves about diversity now. It's not good for your microbiome to be feeling guilty. That's causing you stress. Stress is not good for the microbiome.
That's true. Stress is not good for the microbiome.
Just focus on having the most stable sort of circumstance and again, I know this is common knowledge, routine. Children thrive on a routine, getting enough sleep, being in as calm environment as possible. And then think of adding the diversity one food at a time, as opposed to finding ways for each type of food, or maybe it's a group of foods in a recipe, tweaking that to find it to the way it suits the children's palates. And then you just grow that and grow that and grow that. And sooner or later, they will have diverse palates. Remember, their palates are developing. So that's another reason why they're not so fond of exotic flavors. So you just have to, just one step at a time, just be aware. Just be aware. And they do model their parents. So you can eat more diverse diet, right? And then they will catch on to you sooner or later. Sooner or later, they will do what you do.
I love how you added in, it's not just about the food, right? If you can't get your kids to eat these foods, you can adapt the environment in which they are living, if you can. I mean, that's another angle. And that also impacts the microbiome, the stress that they're under, the amount of sleep that they're getting.
Chemicals they're exposed to.
The chemicals they're exposed to.
Like in the cleaning products, in the body products. They don't care about those, so you can get rid of those, right? They don't care what you clean with.
And in the foods themselves too, right?
Yeah. The cleaner the food, the more they're getting per food.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just work on the diversity aspect.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Lorene. I think there were so many beautiful gems dropped here, and I expect people will listen to this several times to pick up on all of them. Thank you for continuing to do what you do to try to just bring that simplicity and the common sense that you talked about before. It's not complicated. It's sometimes hard to implement, but what the body actually needs to be healthy and regulate is not super complicated. In terms of how it does it is very complicated. But in terms of what our responsibility is to help it regulate is not super complicated. That's what I got from this.
That is it in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for your time, Lorene. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
I'm Ransom, inspiration by an eco-parent magazine. I was on the cover of the first issue when I was a baby. My dad and the rest of the team have worked hard to bring the eco-parent podcast network to life, and I think it's pretty cool. I'd like to help out on it someday, so hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and give this podcast a review, though it's still around and thriving when I learned to do the audio editing. Thanks for listening. Was that good?
Yeah, you totally crushed it.